Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome. My name is Chris Hong and I'm an artist and I make art related videos. In today's video, I'll be talking about honing my alcohol marker portrait style. I've really been enjoying using alcohol markers for my portrait drawings, and I've been trying to hone in on what my style is for these portraits so that I can figure out the appropriate process to achieve the look that I'm after. But before we get into all that, I'm really excited to share that my new portrait art book, Portrait Companion, is officially available for pre-orders. It's 120 pages full of my portrait drawings and paintings over the last 8 years. Pre-orders went live last Thursday and the response has been incredible. Thank you so much to those who have already pre-ordered a copy. Here's me going through the proofs that I received from the printer. Yes, I already received the proofs and the files have been approved for print, so the book is currently in production. The colors came out perfect and I can't wait to see how it all looks with the pages properly cut and bound together. But yeah, I hope this gives you a good idea of what the book is going to look like. For more information and to pre-order your copy, visit my website at chrishongart.com. So while I've been drawing and painting portraits for a long time, using alcohol markers is actually fairly new to me. So with these portraits, I set out to figure out my go-to alcohol marker portrait style. And it's not that I feel that I can only stick to one style, but I feel like I'll be able to approach the drawing better when I have a clearer idea of the desired outcome. So that's what I'm exploring with these portraits here. So with these, I was determined not to use any fine liners or anything to ink or outline. I'm not necessarily opposed to seeing outlines in my marker portraits, but I think I'm learning that fine liners or other inking pens are a bit too high contrast for my liking, and they take away from the subtle rendering that I like to do. So I decided that I wouldn't use them here and see what kind of result I could get with basically just using markers on their own. I did use a Tombow marker to do the initial underdrawing, and that's because I figured maybe it'll blend more seamlessly with the markers, but also just to switch things up from using graphite pencil, as sometimes I feel I can get a little too fussy with the drawing when I use a pencil. With this first one, I used a very limited color palette and I started with my dark values first to anchor the features. I think I essentially used 3 or 4 colors in this portrait: the dark purple for the dark values and the shadow shapes, and then the lighter purple for the mid-tone values, and then a more reddish purple for the reddish areas along the skin, like the cheeks, the nose, and the lips. I alternate between using the brush tip and the chisel tip depending on what kind of application I want to make. And I'm finding that I like to really incorporate angular lines in my portraits. Not that that is news to me, because that has been pointed out to me before by others that I like to use a lot of straight lines. I think especially in the block and stage. I will say though that the chisel tip does leave more visible edges when I overlap the strokes. Personally, that doesn't bother me too much, and actually I kind of like how it gives a sketchier appearance to the drawing, but sometimes it can be a little distracting. I don't know, how do you guys feel about being able to see those chisel tip lines? I think the brush tip is definitely better for a more seamless application. But I do like using the lines from the chisel tip as a way to create interest and a sense of volume. For example, when I shade the forehead, I curve the line slightly in a circular motion, not totally straight up and down, so that it has kind of this rounding effect to volumize the forehead a little bit. And with the chisel tip, I'll also change up the direction of the lines when the form also changes direction, so you can really feel the planar change in the drawing. I do have to be very carefully controlled about it, otherwise it can get pretty messy if there is too much overlapping and crisscrossing of the lines. But yeah, I feel like using the chisel tip definitely puts me in a bit of a different mindset from using the brush tip, and for me, it feels more like sculpting when I use a chisel tip. Kind of similar to how it feels for me when I use a flat brush as opposed to a round brush. Like I mentioned in my previous video, if you haven't seen that already. So I'm curious, are you guys team brush tip or team chisel tip when it comes to alcohol markers, if you had to pick one? I do like flipping between the two and feel that I need both in my process, but I think with these portrait drawings, I may be leaning team chisel tip. By the way, spoiler alert, the portraits from this video are featured in my portrait art book in the marker section. So yes, they went over pretty well and I was pretty happy with the results. And I'm just really happy with how the book came out in general. I spent the last 2 months putting it together, and this past month especially has been pretty crazy for me. But crazy in a good way. It's good to be busy. I just feel extremely proud since this is a huge personal project for me, and a new book is going to be such a staple product that I can offer on my shop for years to come. So in the spirit of celebration, I got myself an iPad Pro. I know, I'm pretty jazzed about it, but truth be told, this is actually my second attempt at owning an iPad. I bought one a few years ago, but ended up returning it because I just couldn't get used to it. I'm not new to digital painting, and in fact, I actually started out painting digitally before I started painting traditionally, but I think I just couldn't figure out how to use Procreate, and I got frustrated trying to draw on the iPad and kind of just wrote it off entirely as it not being for me. But as you guys know, I love going to cafes, and lately I've been really romanticizing drawing on the iPad again, since it just seems so convenient to bring it to cafes and I can do more with it, whereas with traditional, I'm limited to the materials that I can bring with me. So yeah, I got an iPad, and this time I'm really determined to actually sit down and learn how to use this thing. And speaking of learning new skills, I'm happy to mention that this portion of the video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community, offering thousands of classes in countless creative categories, ranging from illustration, graphic design, photography, to sewing, music, marketing, and more. And not to be too shameless, but I actually have classes on portrait drawing on Skillshare as well, if you didn't already know that. But this time, I turned to Skillshare to help me finally get better acquainted with my iPad, and specifically the Procreate app. So I looked up Procreate for Beginners and came across this class by Molly Thorpe called Procreate for Absolute Beginners, an in-depth intro to iPad drawing. And I thought, that sounds perfect for me. And just from a few short lessons, I've already learned so much about the interface and picked up a few gesture shortcuts that's helped me feel so much more comfortable with my drawing workflow. Like tapping with 2 fingers to quickly undo instead of going all the way to the side to click the undo button, or pressing and holding to bring up the eyedropper tool, which is possibly the best feature. I know it seems super small, but I'm realizing that it's these little things that were getting in the way of my drawing and painting workflow the first time when I got the iPad. So now I'm really excited to go through more of these lessons and get really familiar with my iPad and using Procreate. And what's great about Skillshare classes is that they're much more specific and focused, so you can look up exactly the type of skill that you're looking to explore and likely find a class on it. So if you're interested in learning new skills to bring your creative projects to life, the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now back to the video so we can talk more about alcohol markers. So I really like how this first one turned out. I used just the alcohol markers and the Tombow marker. And for those darkest dark values, I just used a darker purple to carefully and selectively draw in some lines or dark patches where I felt I needed the definition. I thought of bringing in a pencil, but I don't know if it's just me. I don't think graphite pencil lays over top of markers very well, or maybe the pencil that I use isn't quite dark enough. It just doesn't mesh well when I try to lay it over top of markers. So you may be asking then, why not use colored pencils? I think with these, I really just wanted to keep things quite simple. When I start bringing in the color pencils, I end up using way too many colors, and along with the markers, it just gets a bit too hard to keep track of for me, and it ends up cluttering my desk. And I know this is such a non-issue, but I do get a little bit annoyed with all the markers and pencils just kind of rolling about on my desk. Also, I feel like with color pencils, I might feel tempted to start rendering with it, and I didn't want to do that here. I guess I just want to have a more streamlined process when it comes to these kinds of simpler, sketchier marker portraits. But yeah, I will say that since the marker tip isn't as precise as a pencil or a pen, it did make things a bit challenging for me, because I just felt like I wasn't able to really bring the drawing out the way I wanted to, and like massage the drawing like I would be able to with a pencil. So I'm making sure to make note of all these things while I work, what I like and what I don't like, in hopes that it will eventually lead me to my ideal marker portrait style. The second one, I'm gonna kind of zoom past this since I actually come back to it at the end. I kind of give up on it at first because I don't like how it turns out. I think my first mistake with this one is that I didn't start with my darkest darks like I did with the first one. I just did like a very timid general shading pass first instead, since I was too scared to go in with too high of a contrast right away. And I think I'm learning that going in strong with markers is maybe the way to go, even though it can be really scary. Because I had to go back in to define the darker shadow values afterwards, which is fine. You know, markers are layerable, but I do wonder if going in timidly from the start made it so that my shapes were also timid and not as clean, and my value groupings not as clear, which I do think having a really clear light and shadow statement from the get-go is the way to kind of set your portrait up for success. I think my other issue with this one starting out is I didn't really like the colors that I picked. I set out on making a very blue focused picture, but used way too bright of an orange and peach color for the skin, so the color scheme gets a little bit too garish. I also try to stick to a limited color palette here in that I didn't reach for many colors, but that may have been to my detriment because the orange and blues they're so far apart on the color wheel. Any overlapping that I do with them seriously grays the color down and becomes really muddy. So I think this is where I should have just allowed myself to pick more colors because they're available and not feel like I have to stick to some kind of arbitrary rule for the sake of, I don't know, consistency. I especially don't like how I went over the light side of the skin with this mid-tone blue color, since it was way too dark and blue for the actual effect that I wanted to achieve. Like, I could have just manually picked a much more flattering color that works better for that area if I had just allowed myself and didn't impose that rule of, you know, I'm only allowed to stick to these few colors that I started the portrait out with. But yeah, I really regret the decision of putting the dark blue in the background since it completely eats up the far side of the face. But I do come back to this one after I work on the other portraits in the end, so it's not quite done yet. We'll come back to this one. With this third portrait, I take the lesson that I learned from the previous portrait and apply the dark valleys first with a maybe mid-tone green, then go over with a much lighter green to represent the part of the skin that is in the light. I went with unconventional colors this time since I didn't like the previous color scheme, and I'm trying to be a bit more inventive with my colors and not feel that I have to use quote unquote skin colors for the skin. I think the key is to make sure to have some kind of warm, relatively warm color to bring in some warmth to the face, because otherwise the skin does read a bit like undead or ghoulish. So for the warm color, I go in with a purple and a pink, also to act as a contrast to the green, and I really like the colors that I picked for this one. Again, notice how I'm using the chisel tip to add some illusion of volume and a rounded form on the head by curving my lines in a circular motion. When I edit these process videos, I do find the marker process ones to be most satisfying for me to watch back, since the effect is much more immediate, whereas with watercolors or other media, I definitely work much more gradually. But with markers, I'm forced to work more boldly, and things just come together much faster with markers, which is why I really am loving it, especially for sketching. I end up bringing in a very dark purpley color for the background and for the dark accents in the picture, and I really normally don't reach for those super dark colored markers since I'm too scared to use them, but I think I need to start using them more because I felt that the contrast was really necessary and it made the portrait pop. I do accidentally end up bringing this color into the hair when I meant to grab a lighter purple, but I keep on keeping on, and I honestly don't even mind it too much in the end since I think it looks kind of intentional. And I think this one might be my favorite out of the bunch, but you let me know what you think. With this last portrait, I pretty much approach it the same as the rest, starting by blocking in the shadow shapes. For the shadow shapes, I usually try to use a color that I want to be the predominant color of the picture. And since I wanted the picture to be kind of a tealy color, I used this aqua teal color to start, so that this color peeks through and influences all the other colors in the picture. Like always with these kind of portrait sessions where I fill the whole page, I definitely run out of steam by the end, since filming at the same time can be pretty tiring. So I think I was a little bit lazy and noodly with this one. And that's something I noticed with this marker approach where I avoid drawing outlines, which is that I'm finding that I'm having to go over the same areas over and over again, since the marker does dry lighter than when initially applied. And even though things look a bit more high contrast initially, once it dries, it doesn't look quite, things don't look quite as defined as I thought they did. And I'm not sure if this is just me, but when I feel like I am applying a lot of markers over top, at some point the paper feels like it's becoming too saturated, I guess with the alcohol and the ink, and it starts to look really overworked. I feel like the texture of the paper gets a bit patchy looking and the colors start to look kind of fuzzy and cloudy. But yeah, I do think it would help if I was better at picking the right colors and values right off the bat, so that I don't have to work so incrementally to build up to the color and the values. But again, I do think I would rather the ability and the room to be able to build gradually, as opposed to going in too strong and then not having any wiggle room. And with the lack of outlines, I think I definitely do prefer a minimal outlined look, so it looks a bit more painterly as opposed to being drawn and then painted in, or painted and then outlined over top, whichever way. That just doesn't really work well for me, or rather, I feel like that's just really not the way my brain works when I make art. But I'm still trying to explore this balance between painterly and outlined. I do think that I am still going to keep looking for the right tool to simulate the drawing aspect, so that I can clean and tighten up the drawing while I work without actually drawing in outlines, if that makes any sense. Maybe what I'm looking for is like a really fine tipped marker. I haven't tried that yet, and maybe that's something worth trying, but I think it has to be something less contrasty than a fine liner kind of a pen. Yeah, I think ideally I'd like to have a 3-sided marker where I have the brush tip, the broad chisel tip, and a fine pointed tip. I don't know if the 3-tipped marker is possible, but hey, maybe I should design a marker like that and patent it ASAP, because I think that's a great idea. My favorite part in this portrait is how I bring in this light pink color to fill in the light part of the skin and the highlight on the hair, as if the light is colored pink. I just think it's really pretty and it gives an additional kind of dimension to the portrait. So here are all the portraits, thinking I was done, but I just had to go back to the second one since it looked really unfinished compared to the rest. It's funny, I tried to do the same trick that I did in the previous portrait and bring in this light purple color into the light, but it just doesn't quite have the same effect as the other one. And I keep fussing with the hair thinking maybe that's it, but I realized that I just needed to up the contrast and bring a darker marker to create some separation from the face and the background. And I feel like that helped immensely. Then I knocked the hair down in value so the hair groups closer to the background so that the face in the light pops even more, and also to kill some of the messy contrast that I created within the hair. Then I up the contrast by bringing the shapes of the ears back out to make the ear pop against the background, and very selectively place some very dark values in the face, mainly to bring out the nose and define the nostrils. And that's where I decided to leave this one. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about my process and what I like and what I don't like, and how leading into that is hopefully going to get me closer to honing my alcohol marker portrait style. I'm curious to hear what you think, if there was anything there that echoed your own thoughts about using markers or whatever else. I really hope you enjoyed seeing these portraits come together. I spent quite a bit of time editing the footage in this one, cutting out all the little breaks so I can keep it in real time so you can really see how I am applying my strokes and layering the strokes to build up the colors and the rendering. Again, as a reminder, my upcoming portrait art book is now available for pre-orders on my website. Don't forget to check out Skillshare, and I think that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!